G'day and welcome to AOS Coach. I am here very excited, sitting in the play garden itself, hanging out with Emma Mangels, who was the winner of Adepticon until they FAQ'd the results. We are talking all things Maggotkin of Nurgle. I'll pass it over to Emma for a second, but I actually wasn't planning on doing another Nurgle show. I had a pretty good, robust one with Tobias, and it was a really good discussion. We've talked about, Glotkin, we talked about the Grand Unclean One, we talked about Be'lakor, we talked a lot about Nurgle, right? But Emma did something that I've been waiting for, and I had to create space. I'm running my own GT next week. I didn't want to do many live shows leading up to my own GT, but Emma pulled out something that I had to talk about, and that is the Filthbringers. So today we're going to talk Nurgle. I'm going to get Emma's experience and thoughts around Nurgle, but more importantly, I want to pass it over to you, and hopefully I don't get demonetized. Welcome, Emma.
I will do my best with no promises.
For anyone who doesn't know who you are, do you want to quickly introduce yourself? Other than like an absolute legend, like I think you have become the people's champion on Twitter.
I'm just trying to play the game, have some fun, and really enjoy the community. I've been playing for, I think, like 4 years now. I started right before 2nd edition, and I started, my first army was 2 Chaos War Mammoths, because that was like the coolest thing I thought at the time. And then I quickly realized that Slaves to Darkness just was not very good. But if you gave them the Mark of Nurgle, top tier. So that was my dive into Nurgle, which was the very start of 2nd edition when War Mammoths could take the Mark of Nurgle, and I was just like sprinkling all the buffs on them.
I remember that. That was in the day, but War Mammoths were out of stock on Forge World. So there was always like these proxy, people were trying to proxy them using the Lord of the Ring, Big Elephant, Momox, or whatever they are. And you're like, no, it's completely different. And then you go to eBay, it's like $1 million for one. You're like, nah, I can't do it. And like you get some dodgy conversions, but I remember those days back in the good old days of those Magma Dragons, and you had I used to run the Carmine Dragon all the time. I had a little Lore Master that would give it reroll hits and reroll wounds for one model. Good times in 1st edition.
They were great. I loved the because I used to use the converted Lord of the Rings box, and then I eventually got the Forge World ones and had the big 280 bases for them, and that was my jam all through 2nd edition. And then Corona hit, and they were like, "No, they're legends now," and I went, "What am I gonna do?" And so when I came back to the game last year, it was like June-ish, and I was trying to figure out what I wanted to play, and then the rumors started coming that there was a Nurgle book, and I was like, well, I got to figure out. I need to find that one weird thing that I really like. And then the Nurgle book hit, and it was Filthbringers, and I went, that's really weird. That's me.
All right, I want to unpack that. I was going to ask you about Adepticon as an event and get you into why'd you pick Nurgle? But I'm curious about Nurgle. I want to talk about Nurgle because, again, the same conversation I had with Tobias, and I want your perspective on this one, is that when I did my book review, and it wasn't just me, everybody who did a book review on Nurgle, the minute it dropped, the negativity was off the charts. Nurgle were unplayable. They're going to retire them. Overcosted. Units like the Great Unclean One were unplayable. They were never going to win. They were too slow. There was just everyone was whinging under the sun when it came around Nurgle, and it's interesting because we've started to see some really good results. And I wanted to ask you first off, why'd you take Nurgle other than the weirdness? Because I know you're competitive, right? You've run Foxes, you've run some, you've run Thunder Lizards, you've gotten, you've got the competitive bone. You are a part of the America team champ. You're in the America team as well for the World's Tournament. So why Nurgle? And what have you found over the last couple of months? Because, yeah, people just kind of claimed it as uncompetitive.
Well, when that book dropped, everybody looked at the movement on everything and went, 4 inches? This is nothing. They're never going to compete. But, nothing is nothing, because Nurgle is the best. Yeah, the best. They're the cream of the crop. And Nurglings are amazing in there too. There's so many good things just sprinkled in this book. They're so good. And so people just need to digest the book a little bit more. And I think once you really dive in there and unpack it, you can kind of start seeing where the fun stuff is, because it doesn't have to be super competitive in your face dragons.
And I almost lost it. By the way, I've just completely almost lost it because that's a Macho Man Randy Savage quote for anyone who doesn't know. He's got a very famous saying about the cream always rising to the top. So it's a very popular gif. You might be my favorite guest of all time. But like it's, people like Joel have mentioned that they seem slow. And is that because of the previous edition where you could, slingshot them and make them really fast from the feculent num? Or have you found speed an issue? Or have you just kind of had to rethink about how you use Nurgle?
I think there's two things. One was the prior book was just way too fast. Like, that book had so many movement buffs with a +3 movement from the Guo, run and charge from the Narmals. It was just like, Nurgle should never be that fast. Things where you'd have something in the back of your deployment, and next thing you know, you're making a charge to the other side of the table. It was just, that was not Nurgle. Nothing about that book felt Nurgle. So, like, one of the things I love about this book is that it feels like Nurgle. And the slowness, it can be a problem. And when you're writing a list, you kind of have to look at it and kind of address that. Like, how am I going to deal with that hindrance to my army? Because every book has some sort of weakness to it that you have to kind of brainstorm. How do I address that in my list? So that was, you can't take how you play another army and then just copy paste, and you have to play it differently and cater to its strengths.
And that was one of the big pieces of feedback I told everybody was, don't just take your list that you're previously running, get it under points, because the points did go up as well, especially if you were running mortals. That was a big trigger. People just couldn't justify Black Kings at 250 at the time. And they still are 250, I guess. If you're watching this in the future, maybe they are up or down, who knows? But I know a lot of people just couldn't justify these changes. And I think what you've said is the right way, is to go back to the drawing board and start from the start, rather than trying to cram in your old list that worked. And then it feels like it's not as fast as it used to be. You're not getting as many units as it used to be. Things like the Glotkin almost like doubled in points.
Yeah, it is. You have to treat this book as a brand new book. Like, even things such as Plague Bearers, like your most staple unit in Nurgle, has drastically changed between these two books. So, like, it's not the same thing. You have to treat it as a brand new army and just build it from the ground up. You can't take things from like Slaves to Darkness or other factions like you used to be before and just be like, well, I'm just going to put this in my army and they're going to enjoy all these buffs, because they're not anymore. So
So talk to me about Adepticon. Is one of the major events in America. LVO, Adepticon. Well, there's a couple of other big ones here and there, whether it's run by the ITC crew, or there's a couple of other independents like Midwest Meltdown. There's a couple of big events. Adepticon is certainly one of the biggest in America. What were you thinking going into Adepticon? Right, you've seen the results at LVO. There were plenty of dragons, lots of Stormcast. When you were building your Nurgle list, what were some of your considerations, and what were you expecting from the event?
So my expectations and why I took this list in was essentially, I've just been working on like what to run at Worlds, and like that's been like my focus. And I've just been tweaking Filthbringers as like just my off kind of fun list. And so I just wanted to have fun when I went to that event. It's known as like a big hobby event where there's a lot of there's a whole debate about soft scores, and you know you know going in that it's a hobby event to celebrate the hobby. And so I just wanted to take an army that I loved, that I love the models that I painted, and I just have fun playing this. And that was my only thought. I had no thoughts of, oh, I'm going to take this because I think it can win it. I just took it because I just want to have some fun.
So spoiler, Emma went 4-1. Is that correct?
Yep.
You went 4-1 at Adepticon with the Filthbringers list. So we will bring up the list, and I want to talk a bit more about, I want to get an understanding from Emma. How does she think about Nurgle? How are you building into it? And what was awesome, I actually really appreciate this. Emma sent me in advance some of her lists leading up to the list. So you can kind of see how it's evolved and iterated over time. And I'll be curious to see, like, what did you learn along that process? You know, and that's part of the challenge, right? Without practice, you go, oh, this looks really good. You think about the synergies, you think about the math hammering, and then when it gets on the table, sometimes they over exceed expectations. Sometimes things don't work. It's too hard to keep in your aura bubble. The likelihood of getting the unit all into combat is difficult, or you just didn't find the situations that you thought about. So I'm looking forward to that part. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, but I think Adepticon.
I think that list writing part is a piece that a lot of folks, they might kind of have some hiccups on and some struggles. Just identifying kind of what's working in your list, what needs a tweak, and then just the way people write lists can kind of differ between players too. So I just wanted to kind of share my list writing process in the hopes that, when I originally posted after Adepticon, I wrote a sentence that just said, "Be the meta that you want to see," and I'm just hoping that maybe through this process, people can kind of see what can they take from this kind of list writing and apply it to their own armies. So we can see some more crazy Gits armies, or maybe some more corn or something wild.
I've actually been playing with a lot of Gits recently. I'm going to be testing in 2 weeks' time Gloomspite with Kronspine. I want to see what I can do with Scraggy and Crondo and see what I can do. Obviously, I can't bond him to Scraggy because he's a named character, but that's a different show altogether. Quick question from Paper J. Which was the army that you lost to? Do you remember who you beat and what you end up losing to?
I actually dropped game 1 to Caleb, who is a very well-known Tzeentch player in the US, and he's been playing Tzeentch for quite a while. So he's got a very good grasp of how Tzeentch plays, and it was only like my 4th time actually putting this list on a table, and it just had all the tools in that list to deal with mine, because he had the sub-faction where turn 1, 3, and 5 he could just auto-unbind something. So like, even though I had Arcane on my side of the table, there was a point in turn 3 where I was like, all right, I'm very in the hole, but like I've got like maybe a chance if I like throw out a Horrorghast and get this unit to flee. So I cast Horrorghast on a 16 because I had a total of +4 to cast on it, and he just looked at me and went, auto unbind. So it's just rough. Sometimes you just get matched up against a really, really bad pairing. And with a good player on the other side, just sometimes not a whole lot you can do.
That happened to me once as a Hallowheart player. I think I rolled a 16 on a spell because I got all these pluses, and my opponent was Khorne, just rolled an 8, and I was like, all right, high five, well done. You deserve that. Like, you completely capped me on that one. But you went in, built a list that you enjoyed. What were some of the things that you kind of learnt about Nurgle, or maybe some things that you thought going into the event that you were strong at, you were good at, you would handle the meta well, with a lot of mortal wounds being thrown around. I don't know if people were running dragons or if they were running a lot of off-meta lists. Like, what were you kind of thinking about your list design? And then kind of what did you learn about it actually at the event?
So one of the concerns with my list too was dragons, because I did play a game. I played this list at an RTT like a week before Adepticon, and game 3 of that, I just got absolutely steamrolled on Tectonic by a Stormcast player with a unit of dragons and long strikes, and he just shot off my Orgots turn 1 and charged in to some Blight Kings with dragons, and those dragons picked up those Blight Kings in 1 round. And I was like, ooh, I wasn't really expecting them to die that quick. So sometimes, some of these matchups, the damage output, even with a 5-up word built in, it can be a bit tough. Nurgle's supposed to be that real durable faction, but sometimes, it's not that durable.
So what are they good at? So, I mean, because they are known for durability, right? You got the 5-up ward, you can do some healing.
They are great in the sustained kind of attrition fight, because that's where the Nurgle really, really shines. But against something like a unit of full dragons charging into you, or a Maw Crusher using the Destroyer Axe, those are like the things that are really going to pop off. But against pretty much anything else, they'll win a grind. With a 5-up word save, you heal at least 1 wound in your hero phase. If you have your Locus of Fecundity, you're healing D3, and then you're applying disease, which is mortal wounds, and that'll really like help chew through things. Like I talked about Nurglings a little bit as one of the best units, and I think they're just absolutely amazing. They will outgrind things that are well above them in point value, simply because they're so durable, and those mortal wounds will add up, and they'll chip away at you. And
plus, they heal at the end of the turn. They synergize well with Sloppity Bilepiper. If you do summon him, like I thought there was some crack science with Nurglings, and I played a game recently against them, and I really appreciate them. I'm like, okay, look, I used to laugh at you. Like I'm from the old school, right, where we used to run like rat swarms and bat swarms, and swarms were like a joke. You'd run them into a pit and you tie it up for a little bit. But Nurglings are no joke, especially when they start healing. You can obviously teleport with them or bring them in from reserve in a terrain piece. Like there's some good utility in those little models.
Yeah, and they have a very strict setup rules if you go to deep strike them, where they have to be within 3 of a terrain, but it doesn't say wholly within, it just says within 3, and it's still 9 for any models. And the most restrictive part, though, is wholly outside of your territory. So luckily I didn't match up against any armies that I had to keep them on the table, because that's a concern on some matchups where your territories are so close. Like if you're on tectonic interference where your territory is half the table, so now I have to put them on that side against a Beast of Chaos player. If they could just could screen you off completely, and then your Nurglings can't come on. So you got to be really careful with that sometimes.
Talk to you. You were alluding to some of the rules, which is why I brought them up on screen. I thought there's a lot of great rules in Nurgle, and I think part of tapping into Nurgle is obviously taking advantage of some of your great allegiance abilities, but maybe not falling down a rabbit hole of trying to get the most out of one particular build. So a prime example, and this was a theory that people were talking through, was things like disease. Right? When you look at this set of abilities, are you trying to build a list that just maximizes disease tokens and always trying to generate 7 on every single unit, every single round? Are you trying to maximize things like your D3 heal from having, Horticulus and the Glotkin, or like how do you look at these set of rules as a competitive player?
So what kind of drew me to Filthbringer's White Ray out of the gate was I looked at all the rules, the allegiance abilities. Like the first thing you do when you get a brand new book is you just look at the allegiance abilities and say, what is this army? What does they get? What is it kind of supposed to do before you even start looking at units or war scrolls? Just what is the essence of the Nurgle book? And when I looked at it and I went, well, there's this disease mechanic, so that's going to put out a lot of mortal wounds if you can really kind of ramp that up. And that's why I kind of started down the rabbit hole of Filthbringers of, do I want to just try to pump out as much disease and max people as quickly as possible and just start melting them with mortal wounds? It's a great mechanic. It'll start rotting things down, but it's not. The more I played, the less inclined I was to go out of my way to try to max disease on things, because you have to have that balance of where you're not putting yourself out of position, you're not overcommitting to something. So it's kind of, how do I spread disease enough where I'm not compromising my board position at all?
And I think that was probably some of the first thinking, and I'll pass the mic back over to you in a sec, was that I remember the first thing people started talking about with disease tokens, like, right, I'm going to get the Filthbringers and I'm going to get my Rotbringer Coven to get the +3 to the cast, and then I'm going to try to cast, I don't know, Umbral Spell Portal or Soul Snare Shackles, and I'm going to try to maximize these disease tokens because the Endless Spell, when it's cast, gets the Maggotkin of keyword, so then it's going to do disease tokens, and there's this massive sequence in order to get it. And then it kind of quickly, like these all these points, all these efforts, and then you come up against Lumineth, and you're like, yeah, that's not happening. Well, as you said, Zinch, like Kayla, just like, yeah, that's not happening. So you're putting all your eggs in one basket. So I'm hearing you're trying to take advantage of the rules without overcommitting.
Right, and like, my initial thoughts was, how do I spread that disease as much as possible and get a Witherstave in my list, which is an artifact for Nurgle Demon heroes that will add 1 to disease rolls for anything that's within 7. So that was like my initial, like, I want to run down that rabbit hole and just max disease with my spell casting, use a Witherstave to get more mortal wounds off that disease, and then the rest of my list to be built to just bog you down. And it went too far in one direction with that, and it didn't have anything to really adjust my play in it. It was too one-dimensional. And as you kind of look at some of these other rules, that disgustingly resilient's gonna really make a lot of your stuff durable. You don't need to just have big bricks of plague bearers. Like, there's a lot of stuff in that book that can be durable. The Locus of Fecundity is just amazing. Even if it's not a Guo, there's Festus the Leech Lord. He's 150 points. And when we get to the list building, you'll see, I think he's one of the best things in the book, because for 150 points, you get a guy who has a big aura, 14 inches, that is not a holy within, like a lot of other rules in the game have. It's just, if you're within 14 of this 40 mil base, you can heal D3 wounds at the start of your hero phase, which is incredible. And with the changes to heroic recovery, where you can't do it in combat, you can heal D3 wounds in combat with this. The summoning, a lot of folks try to go right down into that, the Fouling Host, and maximize turn 1 Sloppity Bile Piper. But outside of that, like, you're not getting a summon until turn 2 if you're not running the Fouling Host. So there are kind of things you have to think about, where your table positioning. What do you have in your Nurgle list that you can keep wholly within your territory, so you're getting at least the 3 summoning points off of that a turn? Because if you don't have anything wholly within your territory, then you're missing out on summoning.
What do you like to summon, by the way? Like, do you have a set of units that you... Obviously, it's matchup dependent and things like... It's Nurgling. It's always Nurglings.
I have found over the course of my games that Nurglings have just been the MVPs. If I already have demons out and I'm in a position where I want to attack something in combat with them, I'll go for the Bile Piper. Like, I had a unit of Nurglings on the table versus Ironjaws, and I needed to kill the Small Crusher. I had like nothing left on the table. It was like his Small Crusher and just like my Nurglings and my Wizards. And so I summoned a Bile Piper, and I had used Festus to put -1 save on a Maw Crusher that turn. So the Maw Crusher is at -1 to save. My Nurglings were summoned in. I had the hero with it wholly within 12 to give them all an attack. So I had all these Nurgling attacks that hitting on 4s, 6s do disease, then 6s to wound. I was giving the mortal wounds. So all in all, they did like 2 or 3 wounds off of just the regular combat from them failing saves. They did about 2 or 3 mortal wounds, and then from all the disease that was on them, they did even more mortal wounds. So they, at the end of the day, they were there. I think it was like 8 wounds I took off a Maw Crusher from just Nurgling attacks.
Wow, that's so good. That's so... You gotta love those stories. I love it when that happens.
I love them, but like Nurglings themselves, it's 12 wounds in the unit, and they're 4 wounds per model. At the end of I think it's the end of the Battle Shock phase.
Is it Battle Shock phase? Yeah.
They any wounds that are allocated to the model just heal. So
Yeah.
they're getting their own healing. They don't have to be by any locus. They're just, you can deep strike them on your opponent's side of the table, which means if they're wholly within your opponent's territory, they're getting you 3 summoning points. And they're only cost 8 summoning points to summon a unit of 3, which means if you deep strike one of these and you get them wholly within your opponent's territory, turn 1, then that means on like turn 2, you're summoning another unit of Nurglings. Turn 3 it comes, oh, I'm just going to summon another unit of Nurglings. And you can generate 4 units of Nurglings with just any basic list.
Do you find people underestimate your Nurglings? Like when you deep strike a bunch of Nurglings or you summon a bunch of Nurglings, do most people just go, oh, okay? And like they continue to look at like your Maggotkin, they look at your Glocken, they look at, some of these other bigger monster types, and you're just like, cool, I'm going to continue doing what I want to do.
Yeah, they can be very disruptive. So you got to be really careful where you put them because you don't want somebody to just kind of turn and just smack them off the table. But you can put them into other units where they can punch above their weight because they're healing. As long as your opponent's not getting 4 wounds through that 5 up ward each turn, then they're going to stick around and they're going to start whittling things down. I had him in combat with 10 chain rasp, and they killed like 6 of them before he retreated them, and I still had my full 3 Nurglings. I've taken off, a pig off of a unit before, where you've had, all right, now I gotta move this War Channer over there to give these other 2 Gorgrunners their +1 damage because I need to clear those Nurglings off before they start dropping more. So they really punch above their weight.
And if you're really smart with your positioning and where you put your Nurglings, and if you got the Sloppity Biopiper around, you can tag that one model, 2 models at most, and you obviously can't pile in with Sloppity within the 14-inch aura. The attack backs into the Nurgling. I found when you're stuck into combat, it can be quite difficult to just fight off that Nurgling without obviously taking out Sloppity. So it was just this cycle of just doing a couple of damage, heals up, couple of damage, heals up, couple of damage. So again, don't underestimate the Nurgling. I think they're good value. Whether you bring them into your list or you summon them, it's good to see them get a little bit of respect finally.
Yeah, they're great. If you want to put them in your list, it's only 105 points. It's like the cheapest thing in the entire book. And if you want to summon them during the game, that's only 8 summoning points, which
they can't be battle line, can they?
They can't. That's the one thing I wish they could become battle line. Like, make if Morbidix was my general, Nurgling should be battle line. Give me that. I want these little fun guys all over my table.
Come on, allow it. Before I get into your list construction and your cycle, actually, I'm really interested in this part of the show. Have you played against Legion of the First Prince, and if so, how have you found it?
I've played against Legion, not with this list or Filthbringers, but I've played against Legion with other Nurgle lists, and I don't think that Legion really has any upper hand in that fight. Like, yeah, you got the Demon Prince that can have your charges, but most Legion lists are very kind of light on bodies to start with, and since so many points are allocated in that big trio of Be'lakor, Kairos, and then usually some other big monster that's going to be your beat stick, whether it's like a Bloodthirster, now people taking Guos. Like,
Khorne Demon Prince is always in there, right? It's
yeah,
always
Khorne Demon
in that
Prince
list.
is always in there too. That there's so few points for you just essentially to see a minimum battle line units, and everything in Nurgle chews through those kinds of units, even with like 6 up ward save. I once you get in combat with Legion, I think you're golden. Yeah, they can delay you a bit with some redeploys and have your charges, but for the most part, Nurgle will win those combat trades, and attrition will take its cost.
Who do you struggle against? Who does Nurgle not like playing against?
They not like playing against? It's kind of an odd thing. It depends on it. Really, it's very list dependent. I find there are some Nurgle lists that will be absolutely great against Tzeentch. Like I lost against Tzeentch because I was running a list that was just very weak against in that matchup. But if I wasn't running like a Filthbringer list, if it was more of a traditional like drowned men list that we see all the time now that are people running, that's much better for Nurgle. So it really, I can't say with like that there's one army that's going to win all the time. It really depends on the list matchups.
It kind of feels like Sons of Behemat, where like they just do something and they do it really well. They do it exceptionally well. You just do the grind. Probably you and like Soul Black Gravelords, especially like zombie builds, you do the grind so incredibly well. But and that's why I know when I play my sons, I don't really care about my opponent. I just run my idiots up the board and I do my thing. But hey,
Actually,
that's a simpleton like me.
yeah. So then you mentioned the zombie grinds. I've seen some struggles against like heavy Graveguard list because Graveguard do an unbelievable amount of damage in combat, and they're just as resilient. So I think if anything, the Graveguard lists are probably the biggest struggle for Nurgle.
Yeah, and obviously, people like Gavin have popularized the Living City, and I'm sure that like Fulminators and Dragons and those things that they just do like an uncanny amount of damage will eventually grind you down because your points went up, so you've got a lot less bodies on the table. One thing I did want to ask you about, we haven't really talked about it, was the actual Filthbringers. So, for anyone who probably hasn't looked at Filthbringers or they kind of overlooked it when they did their book review, this is allowing you to take a special unit. It's called the Rotbringer Coven, and it allows you to take three essentially Rotbringer sorcerers, and they combine them into a coven. They act independently, and depending if they're within range, or they get like pluses to cast. Talk to me about this Filthbringers and what drew you to it, and talk to me a little bit about some of your thinking around the Filthbringers, and then I'll bring up your little cycle of how you're thinking of list construction.
Sure. So the thing that initially drew me to it was the diseased trait, which is the other Nurgle ability where at the end of the battle shock phase, your disease tokens are rolling mortal wounds. When I first looked at this book, I said, how do I get as much mortal wounds out there as quick as possible? Like, because if you disease something top of one, just one disease on them, it'll average 4 or 5 mortal wounds over the course of the game, because that's just the law of averages. So I was like, how do I get that disease rolling top of one if I need to? Because it's a very, very slow army. So that's where I went first in my deep dive into the book, which was Filthbringers. So it's for 360 points, you get 3 Rotbringer sorcerers, which are normally 145 points each. You take them as a bundle, and at the start of the hero phase, you pick one of them, and they get a bonus to casting, unbinding, dispelling. So I was like, cool, I can have one of those wizards get a +3 cast, or +3 unbind on my opponent's turn. So from there, it's how do I make that even more effective? And what else can I do with them? And the Rotbringer sorcerers by themselves don't really do much. Like, I can't really find much of a reason to put a Rotbringer sorcerer in any list outside of Filthbringers, because all they have on their War Scroll is a War Scroll spell to which pick something within 7, and you roll a number of dice equal to the amount of models in the unit, and every 5 of some mortal wound. It's great against horde units. It's only a range of 7. You don't really see a lot of horde units in the game right now. So I was like, that's not very effective. No. And then the only other thing they have on their War Scroll is Tainted Endless Spells, which is any endless spell that they cast is treated as one of your models for the purposes of the disease trait. So now the endless spells that they cast that are roaming around the table at the end of every movement phase and the end of every combat phase are applying the disease to any enemy units within 3. So I was like, that's how I can spread and project that disease all over the place. So that was the initial draw to Filthbringers. And like the Rot Coven is really the only use I could really find for a Rotbringer sorcerer, because if you're not slinging an endless spell out there, it doesn't do anything. It's 145 points. that just sits around and doesn't provide any other benefit to your army.
Well, as you said, Festus is 150, right? So, for an extra 5 odd points, you get the D3 heal. What about the other side of the Filthbringers, right? Because you talked about the offensive stuff, but what about the defensive stuff, the up to +2 or +3 to unbinds and can you dispel? Is it dispels as well? Yeah, dispelling as well. You can have casting, unbinding, and dispelling rolls. So +3 to an unbind, +3 to a dispel. I imagine that could be quite powerful as well.
Oh, it's huge. A lot of armies out there might have only 1 or 2 wizards in their whole list, and if you bring a +3 unbind to the table, like, yeah, you just try casting that spell. I dare you to. So that's pretty massive, and when you combine that with things like putting Master Magic for a rerollable one on that same +3, like, it's perfect.
You happen to have arcane terrain on your side of the board.
Now we're talking.
Damn cooking. Yeah, that's and you're right, like every army has that one spell that they want to get off as often as possible. Daughters of Cain love their Mind Razor. Like there's just every army has that one spell, and if you can just identify it, you're like, cool, I'm gonna get +3 or +4. The pluses to the cast from Filthbringers and the Unbind is dependent of them hanging around. They've got to be within 3 inches of each other. So they are independent units. So you don't have to keep them in like a little trio. You can separate them across the board, but you are giving up your pluses to the cast unbind. So gives you some flexibility, but also you're probably I assume you are mostly running them as like a little trio more times than others.
Absolutely. Like, and what you do with them too is, since you're running them as a trio, and you're keeping them in kind of like a triangle formation, the thing you do is you keep that back one wholly within your territory, where a lot of missions or your territory is 11 inches up. You can keep that one Rotbringer sorcerer just touch in there wholly within your territory, and then the other two that are 3 inches off of that, so you can get them a little bit further up, and you always have your 3 summoning points. And if one of them dies,
yep.
If one of them dies, yeah, you don't have a +3 to cast or unbind anymore, but you still got a +2.
Yeah, that's still good. Obviously, you're talking about the generation of your summoning points when you're talking about having 1 on your backfield and 2. So I love that. That's a very good strategy, because they're right. They are independent models, but they obviously work together. So be very smart, and I love that. So good. Emma, so smart. Which brings me to this list. And when I say this list, this is your series of thinking. This isn't the list, by the way. I know I've been teasing you like it's I don't know, like a strip club going, look at me doing a little dance. This isn't the Emma list. This is not the list that kind of podium at the Adepticon. We'll come to that in a minute. It's actually the list after this list. But you've got your thinking here, and I love this, because when you build a list, and for people who are learning the game or learning the faction, it's easy to go in and see who won a tournament and just copy the list. I see, oh, Emma did really well with Filthbringers. I'm going to grab Emma's list. I'm going to run Emma's list. And I can do that, but I'm not going to often get the same result as Emma, because Emma has the thinking. She has done the work. She has practiced. She understands the army. And that's why you often find a lot of people who just pick up internet lists and run them at tournaments don't do nearly as well as the actual creator. So, which is part of why we do this kind of show, is to go, well, what's the thinking behind the list? And as you see what Emma's done, there is 6 or 7 iterations of this list that you've started with a concept, you've tried it, you've evolved it, because some things have really worked, some things haven't worked, some things you've been missing, some things maybe you've got overcommitted. And it's awesome to kind of see your thinking here and, follow it along. So I might pass the mic over to you to kind of explain a bit more about what you've done, what you've learned leading up to this Adepticon list that we will unveil pretty soon.
So this is kind of a sneak peek and insight into my list writing process, which I actually write my list in an Excel spreadsheet, and I don't. I rarely delete things unless it's like a new addition. So what I did here was the top left where you see the Guo, that's the very first iteration of a Filthbringer list that I put together, and I played that list like probably a dozen games with it. So it was kind of my thinking of the initial read through of the book. What do I want to do with Filthbringers to maximize my disease? So I had the Rot Coven in there. I had the Guo in there who had the Wither Stave for that +1 to disease rolls, everything around it. I put Blowab in there because I think he's just one of the best units in the entire book. And then I went through, all right, what are my 2 endless spells that I want to use? So that was the Hargast and the Shards of Oligar. And for those that are wondering, what the heck are these things? What do they do? The Hargast is a endless spell that gets set up wholly within 12. It's predatory, so at the end of your movement, at the end of your hero phase, it'll move 8 inches. And what it does is anything that's wholly within 12 of it in the battle shock phase cannot receive commands. So anything that's wholly within 12 of it can't receive inspiring presence. So it's great anti-horde tech. So if there's a big horde of units, just start throwing the Hargast over there and watch your opponent go. The other one was the Shards of Oligar, which when I was looking up this model, because I had read the rules on it and was like, that seems pretty good. I was like, wait, what? It is 2 models that are on 105 mil oval bases. Those are pretty large for endless spells. And you get 2 of those bases. So when you're talking about the Tainted endless spells from the Rotbringer sorcerers, 3 inches off of 105 base, you can touch a lot of things with disease. And the shards get set up wholly within 18, and they're predatory, and instead of like moving one, you pick up one of those models and you set it up wholly within 12 of the other. So you can get that 30 inches out, and then anything within 3 of that is getting disease. So you have a tool to project disease 33 inches away from a Rotbringer sorcerer with that. And what the endless spell actually does, outside of being a disease tool, is after it moves, you draw a straight line between the 2 pieces, and anything that crosses that straight line halves the movement and cannot fly until the end of that turn. So it's not as good as like until your next hero phase, because it only lasts until the end of that turn. So basically, a turn you sling out the shards, it doesn't really do anything because it's not your opponent's movement that turn. But just having that threat of it on the table, I found that pretty much all of my opponents used a dispel at the start of their turns to get rid of the shards, which means one of their wizards now just lost a spell cast because they're trying to get rid of the shards. Or if they don't have a wizard, now they're using a heroic action to get rid of the shards, which means less command points. They're not using heroic recovery. And if that Nurgle wheel is on a 4 for no heroic actions, like can't get rid of the shards sometimes. So it's a great tool for spreading disease, burning people's spell casting by having to get rid of that. And the other great thing about it that about not just the shards, but just having an endless spell on your list is the ability to deny battle tactics. So I had games where my opponent decided to broken rank something and they didn't get rid of the shards. And I went, cool. I'm going to pick this up at the end of your hero phase and I'm going to put it right in front of that unit. And now you're not going to have any room when you charge in to really get a lot of attacks off on it. So I can deny battle tactics with endless spells, or you can use them to help secure battle tactics. For instance, I wanted to go in and fight something like a big monster. I'll throw the shards out and I'll put them, on the back end of that to tag it, in base, kind of, so that way, like, if they roll to redeploy, like, they won't be able to move it because they won't be able to clear that in the spell. Like, you can use it against a Maw Crusher and say, all right, I'm going to put this right here. Even if you roll a 6, you're not going to be able to get that big base of a Maw Crusher to clear this endless spell. So you're not going anywhere. So now now I'm free to just move my models closer to you with my slow 4-inch movements, and I don't have to worry about you making my charge longer.
You are seeing a lot of smart play from players at the moment where they're using endless spell bases and even in front of their units to deny charge areas, because while you can move through an endless spell, you can't end on an endless spell. So there's a lot of shenanigans you can do with it. Were there any other endless spells that you considered? Because I know initial thinking people were running or Spell Portal, they were tapping into, as I mentioned, Soulsay's Shackles. They were looking at some of the other things like that. What's that necromantic wave? The stupid.
The
I can't remember what.
Grave Tide.
The Gravetide. That's right.
That was
People are looking for those types of endless spells.
the Grave Tide was one of my initial thoughts of looking at that, and then but it doesn't go very far. When you set it up, it's very slow to get across the table. So I just saw Shards, and I was like, that is so much better than Grave Tide. So that's why I went that way. I know a lot of people love Spell Portal because they're like, oh, you could sport Spell Portal and then Rancid Visitations to do mortal wounds, but things like that are so situational where it's like, if I'm not running against a Horde army, Rancid Visitations doesn't do anything, I felt like. So the Spell Portal, because it's very limited in its utility, I didn't really see a place for it in a list, because everything that I want out of Endless Spell is to not only have its Endless Spell function, but also be able to project the Z's, and also just be a roadblock or a speed bump if I needed to. And so the Spell Portal being on like a 40 mil base, it just doesn't do that well.
But then Shackles would fit into that criteria, right? Because you get 3 models.
Shackles would, but you have to set them up like wholly within 12 of yourself, and Nurgle just doesn't have the move to go to get around it. So I felt like if you put Shackles in your list as a Nurgle player, you're more likely to kind of hinder your own movement because you only have 4 inches. So if I throw that in front of myself, I'm not going to be able to go around it because I don't have anything that moves fast enough to avoid being stuck in Shackles itself.
I imagine, correct me if I'm wrong, Shackles is a type of thing for a Nurgle player that once you're up in the middle of the board and you're trying to defend your position, you throw it out. But what I'm hearing from you is you're trying to get offensive disease tokens from endless spells as early as possible, as opposed to Shackles, again, probably turn 3, maybe turn 2 if you're lucky.
Yeah, because I want as much utility out of everything in my list as I can. So if it's not going to benefit me till turn 3, a lot of games can be decided by then. So it's just I don't really feel the Shackles because turn 1 it's not really going to do much. It might it might be good in a matchup where you have a very kind of aggro list on the other side, like Iron Jaws or just all dragons, where you can be like, oh, here's a spell, it's going to deny this this table space. But outside of that, it just doesn't do anything on that turn 1 or even sometimes turn 2.
Yeah.
Whereas
No, keep going, sorry.
the other endless spells, because how far they can move, like that Hargast sets wholly within 12, then moves 8, so it goes 20 inches. Shards of Oligar go 30 inches. I can, even if I have to go top of turn 1, I can use them to just start projecting disease out.
No, I like it, and that's the kind of thinking that I wanted to hear from you. It's that while they do fit the criteria, what you're looking for is that offensive power, because it's probably one of the big weaknesses of Nurgle is being able to project power at range can be quite difficult. And if you do want to kind of get into someone's backfield, you got your Nurglings, yes, you got your Lord of Affliction, you've lost your speed, you don't have long range shooting, so endless spells are one way that you can get into your opponent's backfield. And I think, Horrorghast and the Shards are 2 good examples. And if people want to go with Shackles, they go with Shackles. But I think you've given us some good thinking around why you've gone with the Shards as opposed to Shackles, or what you're looking for, at least from your endless spell choices.
All right, and so the rest of the list in the very first iteration, I was kind of looking for just how do I spread as much disease as possible early on, and just build around that. So that's why like the battle line, you just see a bunch of plague bearers because they're just the cheapest battle line option. When you're running filth bringers, you only have two choices: plague bearers or putrid blight kings. One of them's 150 points, and the other one's 250 points. So, you know, there's not a lot of variety there. So I was just like, all right, I want to run a big meaty block of plague bearers, so that's all I can afford. The only other access to battle line you get is if you have a Lord of Afflictions as your general. But if that's your general, then you're not taking Master of Magic. So then your Rob Coven's kind of suffering because they don't have a reroll built in. So from there, I played that list quite a bit, and I was always trying to look through ways to improve it. So I was trying to reiterate the list a little bit more, and I was thinking, well, do I need Master of Magic? Like, what does Epidemius look in the list? So I was trying to put together that, and it was just the list just was not looking good on paper. And that was the second list to the right of it. You see with the Scrivener, because I was still hung up on taking the Wither Save at the time. So I needed a body to take that, which means I had to have a Nurgle demon that was not named. And your choices are basically a Scrivener or a Sloppy Piper. That's it, because your Guos are 495 points. Or you have the Poxbringer, which 145 points for a wizard that doesn't do anything else. So I was not happy with this iteration. I was trying to figure out a way to make Epidemius, work in there, and I was like, why am I taking Epidemius? It just came down to kind of what I talked about with the endless spells, which is, what is it doing for me? Like, if it only does one thing, I don't really like it. So I kind of gave up on Epidemius real quick because I realized like you're only taking him to just have access to a few spell rerolls. Outside of that, he brings absolutely nothing to your list. Like, he doesn't do anything else. If he had the Locus of Fecundity for the D3 heal, maybe I'll consider him. But 145 points to just get a maximum of 7, what I'm looking for, 7 spell rerolls in the entire game. It just, I wasn't feeling, it doesn't give me enough. It's a named character that can't take any command traits, artifacts. I was like, no, it felt like a waste of points. So that list went in the bin. I never put that one on the table. But at the same time, I never deleted it off my spreadsheet because, my list writing is kind of, I don't ever want to just delete something. I want to kind of leave it there because maybe I'll revisit something and kind of take pieces. So that's why we have so many Filthbringer lists on their screen right now, is because I leave everything out there and I revisit it. So
and I really like that. I just want to pause you on that for a second and give you, have a sip of your iced coffee, because I love this idea. Because for most people, I'm actually not forcing you drink or don't drink. It's up to you. But like most people, when they list write, they use the app, whether it's War Scroll Builder, whether it is the AOS app. Very few people. This is OG stuff, right? This is where when I used to play Warhammer, you get the notepad and pen, you write it out. I actually did before AOS reminders came out. I actually made my own AOS reminders in Excel using pivot tables and conditional formatting. And when I used to generate my list, I'd actually get out the rules per really bizarre stuff. I'm a nerd. But what I love about this is the fact that you are able to compare it like this very easily to go, right, well, I've run 5 versions of my list. This is how I've tweaked the list. This is what I'm really good at. This is where I'm struggling. At times, I really wish I needed more bodies, better cast. I need something. And I can very clearly on a menu look at my movements as opposed to what we currently do in the app. It's very hard to compare lists. So if you are looking to list build, I think this is a great way or a consideration, whether it's on paper, whether it is on Excel. Good insight to a very competitive player's mindset here.
yeah, so I actually have a whole Excel spreadsheet where I keep lists, and I have a tab of just Filthbringers, and where I've kind of gone through this whole list writing with Filthbringers. So I have all of these different iterations. most of which never saw the table. But it's just that, how the list kind of changes from generation to generation of the list. So see some of these, they're not even close to 2,000 points because I just couldn't make it work. And instead of just deleting something, I left it there so I can kind of look at later on, maybe I revisit a month later. Yeah, because there are weeks between some of these iterations. This wasn't like one day. This was, all right, I've written this, not really liking this. I revisit it maybe a week later. Like, okay, I can see everything that's come before. Kind of, what have I thought about this last week? What do I want to make work? And maybe I just copy some of those elements, put it in here. All right, how much room do I have left to work with? So when I went to my third iteration of it, I said, the things in the list that I didn't like before was, that prior version didn't have that second kind of monster, that second like hammer. All I had were just plague bearers. So I wanted to bring in another Magath Lord, see what that looked like. So I brought in Orgots and I had Bloab. And I thought, maybe I get a little cheeky here and I run a little gut rot. And and I can sneak him around the table if I need to. I can put Orgots with them or a unit of Blight Kings. And that was that line of thinking. And this was the closest version to what I ended up with. So you'll see a lot of similarities in this to my final version, but at the time it didn't hit me. So it sat here at, you can see at 1940 points, and I was close. And this was like, I think maybe around January when I wrote this one, and I couldn't crack it, but it was there in my spreadsheet, and I read back and I revisited it another time, and I said, I don't really like gut rot in that list. It just doesn't feel right having gut rot as my deep strike element. I prefer the Nurglings. They're much cheaper. I don't really feel like deep striking Blight Kings or Orgots. I prefer them on the table. So let me kind of take this and rework it a little bit, put Nurglings in there instead of gut rot. Okay, so I've got the Nurglings. What else what do I have room for? And I went, I could put a Poxbringer in there for the Wither Stave. If I'm running Plague Bearers, I've got 3 units of them. I can give them Fleshy Abundance with an Arcane Tome. I didn't need the Arcane. It was Poxbringer. It's the caster one. But so that was my thought process there, where maybe I have the Poxbringer to give out the +1 wound to my Plague Bearers, give him the Wither Stave. I didn't like it still. It felt like it didn't have enough punch to it, because Plague Bearers don't do anything in combat. They just kind of soak some wounds, and they tickle you every now and then. They might apply a disease. Big deal. So I still wasn't crazy over it. It just didn't have, it was missing something. So I sat on it for a while and came back, another week or 2 later, and I was like, people keep talking about these pusquills. What does that look like? So I tried to put together, a list. What does this look like? I need a Lord of Afflictions though, as a general, to have the pusquill as battle line. Like the points weren't working out with it. With 2 Magath Lords and a Lord of Afflictions on the list, it didn't have enough room. So you see, at 1975 points, I would have to have the Lord of Afflictions as my general for that third battle line option. Otherwise, I'd have to get rid of the pusquills to bring in a different unit. And I wasn't liking it. It didn't have the pizzazz. It was just missing something.
One thing I really like as well is you've gone through the cycle of what does my army look like with all the Plague Bearers. Then you've gone, well, let's bring in some Blight Kings, and then you've even tried to bring in and swap out, bringing in a battle line if situation, and you've flexed and you've tried and you've kind of seen and explored what does the army look like and how does it play with the different conditions. I really like that process as well.
And I think that's what a lot of folks should really kind of look at when they're writing a list is don't just take one list in like a war scroll builder and just keep tweaking it over and over in one night, like, it can be a process sometimes. And in this case, this was over like 3 months of me, casually kind of revisiting Filthbringers and rewriting things, as I'm trying to write other lists for worlds and other things. So I'm just constantly revisiting it, and since I have them all in that Excel file, I'm able to come back a week or two later and go, there's some elements that I really liked in the other things. Like, oh, what was it? Like, I definitely want to have the double Magath Lord. What was my thoughts earlier? And I can go through and say, all right, I had 2 lists or 3 that I had kind of prepared with double Magath Lord. Kind of, is there anything in there that I could have been missing at the time? And that's where I went back and I looked at that 3rd iteration one that originally had that gut rot in it, and I went, if I swap out gut rot for Festus, I get access to the fecundity, so I get D3 heals, and then I get another D3 heal in my hero phase for something within an inch, and I get another spell cast, which is absolutely amazing because this War Scroll spell is just that good. Okay, so I've got 55 points left. If I swap that out, what else can I tweak? I don't really like having all these plague bearers. It doesn't feel like enough. And I'm like, well, do I need that 20 block? And so I kind of start tweaking this list that I had written like 2 months beforehand. But since I didn't, delete it or anything, I'm able to just copy this, paste it, and make those edits to what that final list was.
Cool. Before you get to that, I just want to share one piece of feedback that I tell a lot of people when they ask for list advice. And what I love is that you've actually implemented, not my feedback, but you implement the theory that I share with a lot of people. And that is when you are trying to find your list. And what I often find is that people go to a tournament, they'll go to a one-dayer, they have this list idea, and it doesn't work the way they thought. And they throw the whole list in the bin and they make wholesale changes. They change the hero, they change this, they change that. And often it's too much change at one time. And it's hard to measure if the change was a successful change or it wasn't successful change. What I love about your list is your iteration is the fact that you pick 1 or 2 things to tweak, but majority of your concept remains the same. You kept the Plague Bearers, you kept the Endless Spells, you kept your Rotbringer Sorcerers, you tweak some of your heroes to see how the core of the army would change depending on the hero selection, but you kept most of it and you made slow tweaks as you go. And for anyone who's looking to get better at Warhammer and get the most out of their army list, I highly recommend when you make a list change, 1 or 2. Now, competitive folks and people who practice a lot can do this a lot faster, but don't make wholesale changes unless the thing just doesn't work completely. So just kudos to you. This is a great example of just seeing how you do that process but keeping a core concept.
And it's just kind of applying to when you're thinking about any changes, have you played any of these lists on the table already? And the only one of these that I've played with was that very first iteration with the Guo, and I played maybe a dozen games with that list. I really liked it, and it didn't really drop much games, but it felt like it needed some more punch. Plague Bearers they don't do anything. I needed some more oomph to it. The Guo was just feeling a little overpriced for what I was doing with it. The Wither Stave, while it set up some great combos. One of my games I played with it, I did over 30 mortal wounds with disease in a battle shock phase because I was able to, I start the game and I rolled my wheel and I started on a 5 and went, oh, so next turn it's +1 disease rolls, and I cranked the disease to max, and next turn, so I ran them up the table. I just I'm gonna command point them up in the face because it's Sylvaneth, like they're not gonna deal with them. So ran them up the table, got it. Next turn, cranked the disease up to max and just went nuked. But like outside of that one game, like it felt really great, but outside of that game, didn't really feel it too much. A big, huge base with a 4-inch move that his combat was pretty lackluster. I needed the second monster with a bit of punch. So that's why I was like, I want to bring in Orgots, and then I wanted to swap out Plague Bearers with Blight Kings. That was, some of my thoughts of where I want to bring in, and then the other thoughts in my list were kind of around the enhancements I was bringing. Which in that very first list, I was taking the enhancement for another artifact, so I had the Arcane Tome for an Rotbringer Sorcerer, so we had 2+3 cast, and then I was using that Wither State.
Don't ruin Christmas. I'm going to bring up the list. I'm going to bring it up. Are we ready good to go? By the way, getting a lot of love here. Before we transition, Joel asked really quickly, what about Cogs? Any thoughts on Endless Spell Cogs? Maybe you've got it in the list?
I just, it's like, in the end, I didn't need any additional spell cast because you've got 3 Rotbringer Sorcerers already. And if you take the Arcane Tome, you've already got 4 spell cast. And one of the issues I ran into with the early iterations where I was taking the artifact enhancement was I was actually running out of spells to cast because, turn 1, a lot of times you're not in range for most of your stuff. So, things like Magnificent Buboes or Gift of Disease, aren't doing anything turn 1 sometimes. So that was one of the major tweaks I made in the final version as it was take a spell enhancement. So now I've got the ability to cast other spells that I don't need opponents in range. So I brought in Blades of Putrefaction. So you'll see that on 2 of my wizards because even though it just makes your disease go off on a 5 or 6 to hit instead of just a 6 to hit. It still gives me a spell that I can use, so I'm not sitting there idle. So that was one of the best tweaks I made to my list. It was just a simple change. I said, don't really need the Wither Stave. It's nice, but it's too situational. I want something that's basically going to always give me something. Everything in the list, I want synergies. It has to give me more than one thing. So this was the final version. I brought in Festus because he's the bestest. And what is Festus doing? He's a wizard, so he's already has one of the best spells in the book, which is his War Scroll spell, which gives you -1 save to something within 14. It's tough to get off on a 7, so there's times where he doesn't get the spell off. But if he does get it off, it's huge because anything in your list, now that I've got Putrid Blight Kings and Maggoth Lords, they're all base have Rend 1 and they have Rend 2 and the Maggoth Lords. Now you're thinking of that as Rend 2 and Rend 3. So Festus just amplifies the damage output of 4 other units in the list if he gets that spell off. And if he doesn't get the spell off, then anything within 14 in my hero phase is healing D3 wounds anyway, so he's still benefiting me. The way I deploy him is I put him on one side with Orgots, so he's within an inch of him, and sometimes with the Blight Kings. So that way, at the start of my hero phase, on a 2-up, he can heal one of them another D3. I had a game where my Orgots took like 7 wounds from some bow snakes, top of 1, and I went, cool. 2-up, he heals D3. D3 from the disgustingly resilient battle trait. I don't need the command point, so heroic recovery, and it was back to full health from 3d3 healing. So it's also about kind of board positioning with him. Keep him kind of close, but not in danger. But he doesn't have to be near the Rotbringer Sorcerers. But that 14-inch bubble does extend off him quite a bit. So you are able to keep your army, all within 14 of him for the most part, and then still have him in an effective position that he can get that -1 save spell off an opponent or provide that extra D3 heal.
That -1's, I play with my Gits, and one of my favorite artifacts in the Gits book is the Moonface Moment, which is a little artifact which I little point at the start of the combat phase, and the unit suffers a -1 to their save. It is such a good artifact, and I guess I'm kind of reinforcing it, just as you've said, the fact that you're either going to force your opponent to spend an all-out defense to try to mitigate the -1, or the fact that your Rend 1 or Rend 2 really becomes Rend 3 or Rend 4 or whatever it might be, right? So it's a great spell. I just want to reinforce that I love that spell. And yeah, it's a little bit harder to get off. But I love the fact that you've gone in with the commanding entourage to get the extra spell, because most people's default would be extra artifact. And in my Daughters of Cain list, I've been running mostly not snakes. Like I got into Daughters because I love witch elves, and I've been building around a lot of like spellcasters, right? So I always want to get Marathi extra spells, although that's been changed in the winter FAQ. But I love having my wizards having multiple spell options, and it just gives you a lot more versatility. And if you do lose one of your heroes, especially with a lot of the mortal wound sniping from the various, long strikes, bow snakes, archers, whatever it might be, you've still got some of those key spells on your army. So I love the versatility. I love the redundance, and you want to have multiple options, and you'll find during the game that you need the spell off at this part of the board, not this part of the board. Well, now I've got multiple wizards who can do it. So I love it. And you've obviously got your 3 Rotbringer sorcerers. You've kept that core. You've kept Horgots. You've got Blowab still in there. You've swapped a lot of your plague bearers to be actually, because you were at the start, you were like 3 units of plague bearers.
Mm-hmm.
Towards the end, you were like 2 units of plague bearers and then 1 unit of Blight Kings. And now you've flipped it completely, and you've got your 2 core Blight Kings and then 1 unit of plague bearers. What did you learn? What did you learn that made you make the switch?
It came down to just I needed some more damage output in the list. The plague bearers just weren't doing it enough. For 100 more points, it was effectively 1 more wound with +2 to save, because the 10 plague bearers have 20 wounds, and your Putrid Blight Kings have a base of 20, and then your unit leaders got an extra wound. But having 5 attacks each with rend, and they also do mortal wounds at the end of the combat phase, it just gave me so much more punch and a little bit more tankiness, and that they have a 4 at base save. So I threw them in Hunters of the Heartlands, so that way you can't roar them. They're immune to your monstrous rampages. And that's just an absolute multiplier when you have Orgots, because Orgots is giving you a free command point every turn. And since he's a War Master, he issues that to anything within 18. So having Hunters of Heartlands on my Putrid Blight Kings means I always have the ability to all-out defense them. Like, you can't shut that off. Orgots is on table, I'm getting a free all-out defense. So it's just like having those extra layers of synergies in my list where, even if you do kill, Orgots, I'm still getting some benefit out of the Putrid Blight Kings. If you kill one of them, Orgots is still able to issue commands to everything else. Like, there's nothing in this list that if you snipe just 1 unit, it's not going to shut down like the complete army. But when you combine everything together and all of the synergies that it's getting, that's where it really amplifies. So that, like, I love the Blight Kings. They're very expensive for 250, but you only have 2 battle line options, and you still have to take 3 battle line units. So I went with the double Blight King units just to give me that punch. And with the spell enhancements, because I just wanted to revisit that for a second.
Yeah, please.
It's what I found in my other games where I didn't have the spell enhancement is a lot of times if the endless spells are dispelled at the start of your hero phase, you can't recast them that turn. So I had times where my Rot Coven sorcerers sometimes just didn't have anything to cast. Like, they might have been out of range, or there just wasn't really anything worth casting because they only knew like 1 spell. So having all of the options, what I found with this list is I never had a time where I didn't have anything to cast. Like Festus, if we go back to him, his War Scroll spell is so good that you always want to use it for something within 14. Like, so, what spells do I give him? I'm going to give him spells that are I'm only going to cast if nothing's within 14. So he's got Blades, which I put on one of my own units, or he's got Plague Skull, where I can kind of throw disease across the table. And then I've got my Rotbringer sorcerers. So my general has got the Master Magic, the Arcane Tome, so he can cast 2 spells a turn. He gets a reroll. Gift of Disease, I think, is just one of the best spells in the book because it just spreads disease so well. 21-inch range, gives disease to that unit and every unit within 7 of that one. So that was like the one I always wanted to really have available. and I figured, I'm always going to sling an endless spell with him. So that means his third spell option is going to be very situational. So I just took Ghost Mist because I was, concerned that, versus shooting armies, there's a lot of targets that a shooting army is going to want to go for. So to be able to just make anything like a Wildwood is just phenomenal because, I can sling all my spells, and then with the very last spell I cast, make something, block line of sight. So I've already used all the line of sight things I need. Now I'm going to shut off your line of sight through that terrain piece. So that was the thought process there. And then with the other two Rotbringer sorcerers, I wanted to have buboes available. I wanted a backup Gift of Disease, but I kind of spread out the spell selections, and I put some redundancy in there. So no matter what, like that one Rotbringer sorcerer can cast Blades of Putrefaction on one of my units within 14. The other one can throw out a Plague Squall. And then Blowab himself, his War Scroll spell is so good. If anything's within 14, you're always going to use the War Scroll spell because it's just that good. So he needed two things where, maybe they're a little more situational. So I'm not within 14 of a Maw Crusher or Marathi, but within 21 inches. So I'll take a +1 cast to make it -1 hit with Magnificent Buboes. Or, the anti-horde tech of Rancid Visitations that we kind of touched on earlier, which is so situational because it's really good when you're surrounded by a lot of models from an enemy unit. And, none of my Rotbringer sorcerers are going to be in that situation. Festus is not going to be in that situation. Right, because if they're surrounded by a unit of zombies, I'm in a lot of trouble. And the Rotbringer sorcerers already have a War Scroll spell that kind of does it on 5-ups for more wounds instead of 2-ups. But Blowab himself might be in that situation because I want him, to use him as that combat piece. So I found in 8 games I never actually cast Rancid Visitations, but if it's there as an additional tool in case you ever do need it. So one of the things I wish I would have brought them up with me, but I had 5 little like white cards that I could use like a magic marker on, or like a dry erase. And I named all the cards. So I had Blowab, Festus, and then my Rotbringer sorcerer models are very distinct. I don't use, like I have a Sal the Faithless one that I use as my general. I have a converted one made from a Blowab, and then the other one's this real old metal sorcerer model. So I had old metal written, I had mini Blowab written, I had Sal written on a card, and then I wrote the 2 spell lores that they knew from each of them. So I had that on the side of the table, so I can always kind of refer over to all right, because there's a lot of redundancy. What am I going to cast with each one? And I can kind of look over and go, all right, yeah, that's the model that knows that one. So it's great to have little additional tools with you when you're playing the game.
I've got a couple of burning questions. One, why no Demon Wizard? Because I imagine anyone who runs Plague Bearers wants to be running Fleshy Abundance. It's just the thing that like people just want to do. And it almost feels like if you're not running it, you're giving up something significant, getting that +1 to wound characteristic. So turning your Plague Bearers from 2 wounds to 3 wounds. What's the theory and logic behind not running a Demon Wizard?
It was in the... I had it in the Guo version where I was running heavy on the Plague Bearers. But when, now that I've shifted to Blight Kings, I only have 1 unit of 10 Plague Bearers. So, like, if I want to run Fleshy Abundance, then I have to take a Demon Wizard, but that eats up a hero slot. And with only 6 spots for my leaders, half of that's already taken up by a Rot Coven. So you have to be very selective in what you take with it. And with the high points of a Nurgle, there's not a lot of options because the only choice is a Guo or the Poxbringer as your Demon Wizards. And the Guo is just so expensive that, that was in that first list. He's gone. So the only cheap option would be to being the Poxbringer. But for 145 points, it doesn't do anything else outside of cast Fleshy Abundance. There's nothing else on its War Scroll. And I kind of touched on that with Epidemius too. When I'm looking at something, I want as much utility as I can get out of it. So if it's only bringing me 1 spell, I don't really want it because I want to have more utility in that list. Like, Festus is bringing me multiple things. He's bringing me all that healing with him. It's not just like one spell cast. The Rotbringer sorcerers, they're part of the Rot Coven. That's the gimmick. So, not a whole lot of choices there.
Yeah. And look, like if you're listening to this and you don't run Filthbringers, then obviously you don't have to take essentially a 400-point tax, right? 360 points. And when you add a Guo to that list as well, you're approaching 1,000 points in 4 models. So, you can obviously swap out those points for a Guo outside of Filthbringers. So I can fully appreciate why you wouldn't have Fleshy Abundance for a unit of 10. If you had a unit of 20 or you had multiple units of Plague Bearers, Fleshy Abundance comes in. But for one unit of 10, they're cheap, they're chaff, they'll block up the board, they are a wound sink that you don't need. They're demons, so they'll tie up really nicely with the
Biopiper.
Sloppity Biopiper. I was going to say the Scrivener, but I knew in my head it wasn't Scrivener I wanted to say, so I did a little toot. A couple of other burning questions was your core battalions. You went Battle Regiment, Commanding Entourage, and Hunters. Why Battle Regiment? Like, surely because you're on 6 drops, and if you're going to be under 4 drops, if you can't be under 4 drops, most people would say to you, well, why bother? You might as well play the 1,000,000 drop game. Wouldn't you be better off going like Warlord or something else?
So the thought process there was, what other options do I have with what units I have left? Because half of my leaders are already tied up in that command entourage to give me the extra enhancement, and I wanted the hunters for the Blight Kings. So it left me with 3 leaders and 2 troop selections. And, do I need Warlord? It was a thought, but I've got Orgots in the list. I'm never starved for command points, so I didn't see a need for the Warlord. Then what other options do I have available? And it came down to I could just throw them all into that battle regiment and just one drop the remainder of them, or I take like Vanguard to just auto run something 6, which goes back to why would I take that over a Warlord, which is just a free command point, because that's what a Vanguard is doing. I think it's still called the Vanguard. So it came down to the only battalions that are available. It just gives me a command point that I don't really need. Whereas if I put them all in a battle regiment, it only gets me down to 6, but there's a couple lists out there like Double Maul Crusher Iron Jaws, for example, that never comes under 6. So there's a couple tough matchups there that you can still outdrop.
So you're not playing the drop game, so it's not like you're playing the race to the bottom, because clearly then you'd want to be one drop, 2 drops at best. You're trying to make the most of your units in the best options. And then I'm hearing correctly that, you'll still win some of the drops, because as I mentioned, a theory is a lot of people will throw away Battle Regiment if they can't go 1 or 2 drops. And then you're like me, I'm running, like I said, Gits with like a 10 drops or whatever. You'll beat me in those type of situations. So it's still valuable. It's just that you're specifically not building around 1 drop.
Yeah, it's still valuable. It just comes down to, I took Command and Hunters because I'm looking for that constant utility from it, which is, the running theme of the whole list design, which is, I want to have as much utility as I can out of everything in the list. And then it just comes down to what's left. And so, there's very few, battalions that those things can fit into. And, outside of the battle regiment, all I can get is like 1 free command point effectively. And with, this list and having Orgots in there, I'm never starved for command points. So it just didn't make sense to go that route. And I just figured I'll just throw it in a battle regiment. It won't come into effect most games. Some games, though, it'll happen in. But, that's probably going to happen more often than I would need that command point.
On average, do you find Nurgle wants to go first or go second in the game? And obviously, again, battle plan and matchup depend and all that stuff. But if you are winning the drop game and you get the choice, what do you prefer? Or at least, what's your decision tree? Do you have
most of the time it's second. That's really the majority of the time, because I feel like one of the big strengths of Nurgle is that D3 hero phase heal for like pretty much everything in your army. So if you go first, you're never getting that benefit. And where most of my army is built into spell casting, I got to play against Tom Lyons' Night Haunt in I think it was game 4, and I had the choice of going first or second, and it was on Tectonic, and it was going to be a game there. He wanted to kind of grind, because he had a lot of chain rasp, and I felt like his win condition was pretty much to just not even begin that grind because I got Blight Kings and Hardgast. So like, does it make sense for me to go first? It didn't really. Like, it was risky that I give him top of 1. You sit on my opponent's going to sit on objectives, score their 6 points because it's Tectonic, and then I go. Whereas if I went first, I figured, all right, I just move up the table, like hardly anything's in spell range, and then my opponent can have that ability to double turn me and still outscore me on both objectives without engaging. So a lot of times I feel like I do want to go second because it'll force my opponent to kind of start moving onto those objectives, which is putting them in a lot of spell ranges for things where I've got 21 inch reach on Gifted Disease. So it's most matchups second. Like, I'm comfortable with my opponent usually taking the first turn.
Would there be a situation where you'd want to go first?
I actually took first against a double Maw Crusher list in my game 5, and I still don't know if it was the right decision. I just, I looked at it and was like, well, I can put this unit of Nurglings right here on the table. I spent about like at least 2 minutes measuring the table and let my opponent know what I was doing because I was on his side table, going through my whole thought process. So he knew I wasn't trying to delay things. And he was real cool opponent, absolute joy to play against. And so I did decide to take the top of 1 against that because I found a spot where I could put my Nurglings down, and it shut off Mighty Destroyers on everything except for 1 Maw Crusher and 1 unit of pigs on the other side of the table. So in that case, I did decide to take it, so that way I can move on to the objective, start scoring the points, get some Mystic Shields up, kind of build my castle up a little bit more. And it was risky because I felt like if he double turned me, he kills the Nurglings turn 1, and then he can go right in my face. But I felt like, in that situation, I was already, shutting off that double turn impact of him being able to come in and really hit my army with everything. Because that unit of 105 points of my list of Nurglings, basically stopped, any chance of a double turn really hurting me. So that's where the Nurglings really shine. But in most cases, I think I go bottom of 1.
Yeah, I just imagine like the minute someone sees a really fast army and concerns of being pinned in their own territory, they will often take first just to kind of advance up the board, start challenging on objectives before getting pinned. But what I'm hearing is it's less of a concern for you.
Yeah, I wasn't too concerned because if somebody wants to get up in my face, with my deployment, I had kind of my Rotbringer sorcerers in the middle with kind of some plague bearers in front, but then I had my Magath Lords and then the Blight Kings I had in front of them, so they were kind of on the ends, and I had Blow Up on one side, and I would put Festus next to Orgots on the other side. So now everything's within 14 of Festus for D3 heal. And because I've got Blow Up on this side and Festus on the other side, I now have 2 really, really strong spells with a 14-inch range, so I'm getting full coverage on my entire army for anything that comes into me, that if I get either of those spells off on something, I'm going to kill it. Like putting -1 save and having Blight Kings and a Magath Lord available, or putting Miasma Pestilence on something and being able to constantly do wounds every phase to it. I'm like, please come in my face with this list. Like, it's
come
going
into
to
my
hurt.
ranges. Come into my 14-inch bubbles. I'm all good. And the great thing as well is like you're durable enough that anyone who charges into your face, you can take the punch quite well. And then respond appropriately. Where some armies, especially ones that don't have the screens and the chaff, it seems like screens and chaffs have been thrown out the window. People have forgotten to take them, and now they're starting to get punished. I do wonder what the world might look like if Hunters of the Heartland ever gets dropped, or what the General's Handbook 2022 is going to bring to us. But it seems like people are forgetting about screens and chaff, and at least you have the ability to kind of take the punch and then respond appropriately. So that's probably one cool thing about Nurgle, is that you can take the punch pretty well.
Pretty well, except for those dragons and the Destroyer X Small Crusher every now and then.
Well, what do you do against dragons? Like, if you come up against another dragon list, what advice would you give a Nurgle player?
With a Filthbringer list, the only thing that I do against dragons with that is pick up my own models. But against dragons, typically with Nurgle is, if you do have things that can actually sustain in combat and you can initiate the combat yourself, then you're in great position with Nurgle, because I think, based on my experience with Nurgle versus dragons, Nurgle wins it out most of the time, because they don't really have any mortal wound protection unless they're running the one sub-faction with the 6-up ward, or they can guard us, and most people aren't doing that anymore. But if it's 4 dragons that charged you, you're probably picking up some of your models, unless you have something a little bit hardier. Like, that was the main risk with this list, is just 5 Blight Kings instead of a unit of 10, or even just those Maggothords can be a bit weak. Blowab's nice because on a 4-up you're -1 to hit, which is fantastic. But overall, it can be a bit rough if you don't have the units that can really take that punch, and that was very much one of the weaknesses of this list. And really, I was hoping to avoid the dragons, but luckily Caleb was nice enough to give me the loss round 1 with the Tzeentch list, that I got to avoid the dragons.
If dragons can need to continue to be popular, would you try to get a unit of 10 Blight Kings in this list?
I would love it if I could find it, but it's just so hard on the points. Everything is so expensive in Nurgle, and it's like I keep looking back at it and going, like, what could I even adjust? Because I'd basically have to give up like Orgots or Festus or the Nurglings, and just, you lose so much when you start dropping those things.
By the way, I forgot to bring up your awesome meme. Initially, I was going to kick off the show and ask you why Filthbringers, and I think this summarizes it pretty well, Emma.
This is the whole reason why. I just enjoyed playing them. That was the whole reason I dived into Filthbringers. And cool. Kept it going with it. I just think it's neat. Nobody else is doing it. There's probably more competitive Nurgle lists out there. We've been seeing a lot of people run some pretty smooth brain lists to success. But I wanted to really put a challenge and say, I'm gonna take something that everybody said, no, that's you'll never see that, and see what I could do with it. And I really, really enjoyed playing this list, but it was rough even getting it to 4-1.
Yeah, no, it definitely takes a good pilot to, kudos to you, because I think a lot of people really like the idea of the Rotbringer Coven, but I think a lot of people gave up on trying to work it out. So I think you've done an incredible job, which probably leads me to some of the last questions I want to ask for you, unless the chat has a couple of extra questions. The first one was around the battle scribe around primary targets and prime hunters. Was that in play at Adepticon, and did you notice it made any difference, or have you, even after Adepticon, have you noticed any difference for Nurgle? Because you're not any of the priority targets, right, are you? No, you've got nothing on the list.
There's nothing.
Unless you take Be'lakor, but naturally nothing's in the list.
Right, there's nothing in Nurgle book that's a hunter or target. So it actually did come into effect in Game 5 when I played against Double Maw Crusher, and I won by a single point, and then because both his Maw Crushers are dead.
Yes.
And also because he failed a battle tactic. So that was huge, and that came down to just all the synergies in the list where I had, a Mystic Shield on Blow Up already, and I knew, that was the bring it down target, and he's got that built-in 4-up, make you -1, and so, that was the only game that I've had where those priority targets really mattered. I did play against a long strike list with dragons in it, and it didn't really matter there anyway, because just making those things give you an extra victory point doesn't help if you can't kill them because they're picking up your models. So all in all, it did come into effect in one game, and in another game it didn't matter at all.
Which actually kind of leads me to what I wanted to ask you as a follow-up is how do you handle long strikes, sentinels, bow snakes, man skewer, killer bows, all those things that are doing damage from afar? And given your Rotbringer sorcerers, like if they target those Rotbringer sorcerers, they'll pull it down pretty easily with the mortals.
Yeah, but it's luckily they're smaller models on small bases, so you're able to hide them behind terrain. So if I'm going against a lot of shooting, I'm basically just hiding that whole trio behind terrain, and luckily with endless spells, you don't have to put them down within visible range. You just have to put them down wholly within range of the caster. So I can still sling out my endless spells even out of line of sight. And so it's just those big monsters, that Blowab and Orgots that are going to take the wounds. So against heavy shooting, you're just going to have to kind of put them closer together with Festus within an inch of both of them, and go, all right, I'm going to have to finest hour, Blowab, top of one, take your shots, and hope that one of them doesn't get picked up top of one, so that way when you go next, you can get that extra healing out of having that Festus there.
And the problem, I guess, is that if you finest hour like Horgots, for example, then people just go, "Cool, I'll go to Blow Up now instead." And it's that dance, right? I found that with Megas. I was like, "Cool, I finest hour this one. Cool, I just put everything into here." So it's hard to handle, and I guess that's probably one of the challenges is that you don't have that power projection to take out the long strikes. Am I going to bring in a lot of affliction and try to do some movement shenanigans and try to get in? And probably not. You don't have the shooting, and I guess the endless spells are kind of how you can start doing it, but it's not a viable, easy strategy to do.
Yeah, it's just kind of an issue with the kind of current state of the game where there's no real set kind of tournament path for like the terrain on tables. Like GW put in rules for Wildwood in the core rules, but you still don't see a lot of events that are actually incorporating that into their terrain on their tables. So I'm looking forward to seeing what how the GW events look, because I know Chuck Moore has been assembling trees all year long, slaving away in his garden, just planting those trees. So it's cool to start seeing that actually hitting the table and being a standard. So I think there's been a lot of discussion in the community about what the terrain should look like on tables, and as we keep seeing more shooting armies coming into the fold, maybe the community does need that level of terrain, hopefully not 40k levels where it's you have to have L-shaped walls and this and that, but I think we do need some level of having line of sight blocking terrain to at least put some counterplay, because it feels bad right now when there's not any counterplay to shooting, and you go to events and the terrain is like maybe 2 inches tall at most, and that's why you see a lot of these shooting lists just really shine, and just because there's no counterplay.
Yeah, and as a tournament organizer, literally I'm running a 90-player tournament next week. It's hard to have multiple level type of terrain and blocking line of sight. But I think to your point, and I've been doing a lot of research in 40k 9th edition, looking at terrain rules, and not that I want to take the 40k terrain rules and just dump them into AOS, but I'm thinking what are the lessons and what can you start doing? And I love the idea of just pre-labeling terrain to go, right, this is this. Not just mysterious landscapes, that this blocks line of sight, this is garrisonable, this is an obstacle that does this. And I think there's more, probably a second layer of terrain that needs to happen in AOS, because you're right. I think we are creating our own problems by having 2 flats of boards, which enables the shooters to have free reign of what they want to shoot. I think if we had some more line of sight blocking, even if it was just defined, yeah, it might be a hill, but my hill is line of sight blocking, then we have a lot less problems. Don't at me about sentinels, folks. Don't start. We all know that's a separate issue altogether. So yeah, I think that'll definitely help. But do you have any concerns about things coming out in the near future? Fire Slayers, Iden of Deepkin, Daughters of Cain, Nighthawk. Any concerns?
I think the only concern I have is probably just that incarnate of that's Conspire that's going to come out. I don't like the idea of having a little mini Marathi that can get inserted into any list. That's going to take at least 2 turns to kill. It just doesn't. It's too basic, and it's just like, hey, here's this model that's hard to kill. It just goes in, does damage in melee. I think that's really my only concern, is kind of that direction of where 3rd edition's been going, which is like put big monster on table, charge big monster, do damage, opponent pick up model. And like there just doesn't seem a lot of like I guess like thought around how you play some of these units. Like, I know Teclis is like a big bad because he's got all the spellcasting dominance, but like I like him though, because there's so much you can do with him. You have to really think about everything you're doing with Teclis. He's got options of, am I going to cast 4 spells this turn, or am I going to make it 2? Which spells do I want to cast? Because that's where his power comes from. But my only concern with things right now is just this, this monster heavy, like, just put big monster on table, swing. Ugh.
Have you, by the way, like that's actually why I've been playing a counter meta. I've been playing 120 idiot gits recently, because I'm like, well, you can run a monster. You count on 5 an objective. I'm just going to grind you with my netters, and I'm just going to sit on an objective and laugh at you. And I don't care which long strikes shoot my gits, because they're all 120 idiots. But would you add a Kronspine to your list? Would you, as a Nurgle player, not on principle, but as a competitive option? And don't start on like buying Games Workshop or not. Like, just like, would you take the model? Like, would you take it as a Nurgle player?
As a Nurgle player, I don't really see a real need for it, really. Like, maybe it's pretty good with that fly spam where you're just gonna go right up the table anyway, and now your opponent can't retreat and they're just bogged down with Puscoils. So I can see maybe it can be really obnoxious there, but overall, and any other kind of Nurgle list for 400 points, Nurgle's already really tight on the points. So it's just tough trying to find that spot where it fits into. And since it's giving -1 to casting for any wizards that it's not bound to, that's within its domination range, Nurgle already doesn't have a lot of bonuses to its own spell casting, and there's a lot of good spells in Nurgle. So now you got to be extra careful with its positioning. So I can see a lot of other armies where it's really going to shine, where Fire Slayers, maybe you throw that in there, and you have a nice big monster that's not going to die, or you throw it in Deepkin because their only monster is 500 points. You got something cheaper. KO doesn't have any monsters. I've been already writing lists with it for Legion of the First Prince, because with having a huge level of control and now you can't retreat.
Well, that was what I was going to ask you about. Is surely the no retreating from combat with the Kronspine would play well to Nurgle, because you lack speed, so as you're advancing up the board, you're able to pin your opponents within that no retreat bubble. Surely that's and obviously Nurgle lacks damage as well, so surely you've got the speed, you've got the damage, you've got the no pile in. It can go hunt those long strikes and bow snakes, and while the rest of your army advances. Surely, or it's a screen, right? More Crusher comes in, and you try to screen off some good stuff. It'll take the punch and then still respond, and if it kills the monster, it goes up a level.
I think it's I think you can build around it in any army. Like it's just one of those war scrolls where it's just really strong, and the fact that you can put it in anything, you can certainly build around it. Like I think it could be pretty deadly with that Puscoil spam we've been seeing lately. But it really is going to have to depend on, the list that you build around it. Like Nurgle is a book that's so versatile, that there's no real one way to run it. We've seen success with a lot of different Nurgle lists. Befouling Host, we've seen Drowned Men. We've seen a lot of variety in these lists, and so it's not like Lumineth, where you're saying, cool, are you taking foxes with your sentinels, or are you taking Teclis with your sentinels?
Yeah, Law Seeker, no Law Seeker, yeah. And like I appreciate your thinking, right? Not a lot of people have had a chance to test it out properly or enough, right? But I really wanted to get some of your early thinking to say, would I find 400 odd points in my army to bring in Kromspine? What am I giving up? What will I get out of it? And there's no right or wrong here, folks. If you want to run Kromspine with your army, go do it. I do worry that we're going to come into a meta where it's going to be basically Kromspine versus Kromspine. And you're going to have to take Kromspine if you want to be competitive, but let's see how it all goes. And maybe, your durability is enough to be able to handle it appropriately and start bringing those levels down.
We're bringing back Archeon to deal with these Kromspines. We're just going to outright slay that Kromspine and just say,
well, no, you can't. It just brings a level down.
It'll bring a level down, and then you still do your 18 wounds, and end of that turn, it's gone.
Yeah.
So,
or Hand of Dusted, or Oh no! Slayer of Kings is a hero only, and Kromspine's not a hero.
Oh, it is hero only.
Yeah, it's hero only. I
hate
thought
this
about
it more now.
You can't even do it. Yeah, it's hero only. So I thought at the same thing. And actually, initially in my video that I recorded, I actually had said Slayer of Kings, Hand of Dust, and then like in a discussion, I'm like, oh yeah, that's right.
Oh my god,
Slayer of Kings is hero only. So, all right, last question, Emma. I'm going to let you go. As a Nurgle player, if I'm an aspiring Nurgle player and I've listened to this chat and I'm super pumped up, I'm going to go buy some models or put my models on the table. Do you have any final advice for me to play the game? Anything you've kind of learnt since Adepticon? Actually, before I get to that question, Mike had asked, are you running Nurgle at Warpstone?
I'm not sure what I'm running at Warpstone, actually. Our worlds list are actually due on Monday, so I would like to run my worlds list. My only problem with that is I need a couple more models for it, which are still in the mail. So I don't know if I'll actually have them in time. So
surely Mike will let you proxy. Mike, let a proxy.
I'll probably I'll probably run. I don't know, whatever I feel like packing on that Friday, because we don't have our list due, I don't think, until the day of. So I've got no clue what I'm taking to that. I might help
your world's team. Help your world's team. Let them proxy. All right, back to my last question, Emma. Is what advice would you give me, or lessons, or things that you've kind of learnt along the way? Maybe some traps I should avoid. Like, what's your final thoughts on me as an aspiring Nurgle player? What would you tell me?
Basically, the thing you should do is if you've chosen Nurgle, or really goes for any faction, really digest all of those allegiance abilities. Understand what is it that your army is really wants to do. Like, what's the essence that makes your army that army, and then go over all of the war scrolls in your book before you start really trying to repair something. And see, is there anything that just really sticks out to you that you just really want to put on the table? Because you can build a list around it. Pick anything in the game, you just write a list around it. But kind of look at, okay, where are the synergies going to be, like, and don't just take a look at one or two things and say, all right, I'm just going to spam that. Just really kind of dive in and see what are all of the possibilities. What tools does X model bring that can do something to another one. I touched on a couple times earlier, like, I don't really like units that only do one thing. If it just does one thing, it's not worth it to me, because if you don't get that thing off, then you just have a model that's just sitting there doing nothing. Which is why I touched on everything in that list. It's doing kind of multiple things. So that's one way to look at the war scrolls when you're trying to write through a list. Is if it's only doing one thing, maybe there's something else that you can take that'll give you more options, because you want to have as many options when you're playing the game as possible, so that way you can adapt. And that's
No, I like it.
That's really like the best advice that I can give is just is to really digest the rules, and keep tweaking, and don't give up on things. Like the event I took this at, I lost game one, and it was pretty clear early on in that game that I wasn't able to win it because I didn't have any of the tools to beat the other army. So don't give up on your game. Just kind of play it through, figure out, okay, I'm at an event that's it I can still score points for just completing battle tactics and grand strategy. So go into the salvage mode when you're playing games and say, all right, how can I get the most for this event out of this loss? And then don't let that discourage you from the next game. I went to the next game, I got paired up against ogres, and I was like, I just love playing ogres. Like, they're just such a fun army. So I was just like cloud nine. I was like, I get to play ogres. Like, I didn't care I lost the last game. Like, I get to play against some ogres. This is awesome. So just every single game that you step into, just treat as a new, brand new game. When you're going to events too, you're paying money, you're traveling to get there, and you're playing against other people that have traveled from around, and they're paying money to be there. Try to enjoy yourself. Like, don't take it too seriously. I made the mistake when I first started playing of just trying to take things way too seriously, and I really didn't make a lot of friends because I was just too laser focused on just gotta win the game. And the more I've relaxed, and after COVID, I didn't play for like a year and a half, and then I finally started going back to events, and I was just like, I just want to roll some dice, put some fun models on the table, just try to have a great time. And the more fun you have, you'll probably have some better results. And you'll have a better time too. You'll make more friends.
I definitely can appreciate that, especially because I had 4 months of hard lockdown where literally, by the way, you used your summoning points to summon Caleb. I noticed. Well done. You got your 8 summoning points eventually. But I agree with you. I think especially during COVID, and now that I've come out of COVID, I just want to roll dice. I want to have fun. I'm messing around with things that I wouldn't normally mess around with, and I might get back into the really hyper competitive version of Anthony, and I'm going to go to LVO, and maybe leading into LVO, I'll get into really hyper competitive Anthony. But I think you've raised some really good points. Just get out there, meet friends, roll some dice. Don't take it too seriously. It's not like winning the tournament gets you $1 million, right? You're not retiring. You're not semi-pro. You haven't got your pro card. But you've done well. You went 4-1. You won the event before it was FAQ'd, and I think you've done incredibly well considering you ran an off-letter meta list. You didn't run your fly spam. You weren't running the Glotkin. You weren't running some of the other competitive I use brackets there. The things that most people would stick to in a Nurgle list. You were able to prove that the book is diverse. There are lots of ways to play it, and no matter if you want to go mortals, demons, a mixed combination, you want to run the Magath Lords, you want to run the Great Unclean One, whatever it might be, there is a competitive level and an option for you. So Emma, you've absolutely killed it, and everyone has loved this discussion. Anything that you want to say finally? Any shout outs? Any people you want to call out? If people want to talk to you, you are on Twitter. I would highly recommend following Emma. She has the best tweets. She has some of the best memes. I actually stole one of your memes without even knowing, and it was just like, I recognize that. I'm like, I don't know. I wake up in the morning and like every Facebook group is sharing this particular meme, but I now should know that you are the ultimate meme creator.
I'm just trying to have some fun with the game, and like I originally said with this list, just kind of be the meta you want to see with it. Be the kind of player you want to play against. It took me a little too long to kind of realize that when I first started to play, but ever since we started up third edition and events started happening again, and I've been back in the scene, I'm just trying to enjoy it. It's a hobby. It's not a job. Like we've invested our time, our money, like we've developed, and the more fun you have with it, the better time. You're going to have more memories. You're going to make more friends, meet more connections. And, you know, some of those connections, you know, I applied for Team America last year. I figured, you know, I'll, you know, at least just get some games in against some great players around the country. Somehow they must have screwed up their spreadsheets and they let me on the team. I don't know how that happened. But you know, there's been some allegations that I know something about Warhammer. I don't know if they're true or not, but you know, I don't want to lend any credibility to these charges that I'm somewhat knowledgeable about the game.
Listen, Emma, you rocked up the day before at Adepticon to play in the 40k event. You have played 10 games of 40k, and you went 3-0 or 4-1 or something.
Went 3-1 in 40k there. You know, getting
10 games under your belt.
That was a ton of fun too. You know, I rolled up to a 40k event. You know, just wanted to have fun. Just wanted to roll dice, put some models on the table, and all 4 of my opponents were super fun. You know, I know that game gets a lot of bad rep, which, you know, with its meta, like maybe, but you know, it's just, you know, you're only gonna have as much fun as you bring to the table, and you're only gonna have the experiences that you make. So if you're gonna create a poor experience, you're gonna leave with a poor experience. So you gotta just, you know, it's your vacation, you know, it's your time off. If you're going to an event, enjoy it, you know, make those connections, meet people, you know, and then you end up going out and having dinner with folks, you know, having some laughs, and you'll be surprised about the people you meet in this hobby.
Yeah, which is why I recommend people attend tournaments and events. It's not about, you know, crushing your enemies and making them cry. It's about, you know, meeting new people, going out, having fun. Just, you know, it's probably the thing I enjoy the most about events. And look, I'm going to wrap it up because I think you've nailed it absolutely perfectly. Emma, you reluctantly have not told people where they can follow you. They can find you on Twitter as at YesNo. Yes, no, something. Go follow Emma. Best memes on AOS. Highly recommended. And she's a bit sassy at times too, especially when she gets FAQ'd from events. But you're obviously going in Team America. I wish you best of luck at the World Tournament. You've got a great team and some really good players on that team. So I'll be following along and wishing you guys really well. And that's probably it. Unless you got anything else to say.
Well, I'm really looking forward to Worlds next month. Hopefully we can carry our captain Jeremy to some wins. You know, he's a tough guy, you know, but we got to really carry him on our backs, and hopefully we'll be able to get that for him.
He's a KO player, so he's got his oh, did he get his White Dwarf just in time, or has he missed out on that? Or is he not using KO?
I can't recall if that was that just came out because the rules cutoff was in March.
Yeah, so he won't be able to use the KO.
Yeah. I mean, he can still run KO.
Well, not the new rules. Oh, this is going a bit weird. All right, no, Jeremy is not bad. Jeremy is a legend. I actually should have. Jeremy is long overdue. I need to invite him onto the channel. But Emma, this has been amazing. Thank you so much. I appreciate all the Nurgle insights. You've shown us that there are lots of different options in the book. You've reminded us why we go to tournaments. It's to make friends, to be nice and roll dice. Sorry, War Mistress, I stole your slogan. Go check that channel out as well. She's amazing. But Emma, you're a legend. Thank you so much. I'm going to play the outro and yeah, you know, like, subscribe, all that stuff. Bye now. Thanks for sticking around until the end. I hope you found that video interesting and you walked away with a few new ideas. If you did, I would appreciate it if you hit like on the video, as well as left me a comment. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section below. The conversation will continue over on Discord, so link is down below in the episode description if you want to join the Discord and continue the Age of Sigmar conversation. I want to give a massive shout out as well to these absolute bloody legends, these champions who have continued to support me through Patreon or YouTube members. That is going directly into supporting the maintenance and the growth of this channel. So thank you very much, guys. Much appreciated. And until next time, roll more sixes.